products due to high cost. And then in Kenya, it says a Kenyan study found that 95% of menstruating girls missed 1 to 3 days of school days. 70% reported a negative impact on their grades, and over 50% stated falling behind in school due to menstruation. So we're talking about menstruation today. I think to start off, I just want to just throw it out there. Like I said, I was going to put Janet on the spot, but I'm sure that AZZIAD also, can give a great definition as well as Folu. But what is menstruation? How do you define it?
How do you define menstruation? That question. And all the facts that you just read there, Fife, for me, it's like 2022 to still have that level of inaccessibility, I think is one of the reasons I continue to talk about it for a long time. I just feel like it's such a punch in the gut for women and girls to have to, resort to using unsanitary products during their period. Yeah. On one end, it's a very normal biological function. It's basically the discharge of blood every month. And it shows that you're a healthy person. It's a normal biological function that happens to women and girls. On the other hand, it's a transition. It's about suddenly there's this mark towards womanhood, which in its own way, I think has also brought a lot of, shame and stigma and shock, especially for girls in that space. And I think we were chatting with Fife earlier, and I'm like, one of the things that I really enjoy is throwing out what was your first period like? Because I feel like that one story alone, first of all, I don't know that we ever forget our first period. But what I find it does is that it opens up a conversation to different thoughts and issues and viewpoints just by talking about first period. So that's what menstruation is to me. It's this normal biological function that happens, but at the same time, it's this massive transition. And with that, I just want to throw it, right back to Fife, then to Folu and AZZIAD to just talk a little bit about, what was your first time like when you think about your first period? Do you remember that day briefly? Like, what stood out for you? What was it about? AZZIAD's like, let me remember and try not to cringe when I remember. So Folu, AZZIAD, and Fife, I'd love to hear about your first times.
I would love to hear from Folu first, but I'm ready.
Right. Okay. Hi, everybody that's tuned in. I mean, first of all, thank you guys for checking into this conversation. It's super important because at least in Nigeria, women make up over half the population. And if over half your population are affected by something, that means your entire country is affected by it. It's a very big deal. Yeah. I remember even having conversations with my mother about what a period meant, and you're told like it means you're becoming a woman. And I was like, come on, when is it going to show up? When is the time for this thing? And it came completely by surprise. I'd finished school, I got home, and I remember going to use the bathroom and looking down. And I was like, I don't have black panties. Why is my underwear? What is this? And it was my aunt that was around. So I had to call her in because even though they kind of tell you that you're going to be a woman, like the specifics of it were kind of missing. So I wasn't really sure if this was that thing or if there was just a problem. My aunt is like, oh, this is what we spoke about. This is what's happening, and tells me you have to use your pad. And it was a nice experience at home. But I remember going to school and for the rest of that week, and it was a very confusing experience. One, because the school bathrooms are not equipped to deal with girls who are bleeding. They are not. They were barely sanitary. And as women, we know how important it is to keep everything clean. So you didn't even want to go in there in the first place. It's co-ed at the time. It was like both boys and girls, and people missed toilets and all this sort of stuff. So you were petrified about going into this dark, scary kind of space anyways. And then occasionally you kind of leak through stuff, and this teacher's just like, you are stained, go, you are, and it's, I would, I remember just being kind of petrified all the time and a bit confused, like, what do I do? How do I handle this? Must I just stay at home and not go out? And I went to a relatively comfortable school. I had a relatively comfortable upbringing and background. And I can only imagine what that's like for girls who don't have that experience, of which so many more girls in my country don't have that experience, And I can only imagine how much more scary and daunting and overwhelming that is. And fast forward from there, I also remember being spoken to by other women. And when you talk about the discomfort, people very quickly then spiral into this very dark, yes, man, it's so horrible, time of the month, oh God, and it starts from a young age gaining this really negative connotation and really negative idea, like you will always be in pain, you'll always be moody, and it doesn't have to be that experience. It's taken me well into my adult years to develop a healthy relationship with my flow, and a fantastic way to manage it, so much so that I kind of look forward to it each month, and I will talk about period cups. Yes, because I'm like, ooh, it's cup time, girl. Ooh, it's so clean, it's so neat. I understand what's going on.
I mean, while I have a better relationship, I'm not on that level.
No, and it was the lockdown. That's what did it, because I just thought, if there's so many women in the world who are sort of transitioning to the menstrual cup and the period cup, there's a reason that's happening. When we were scared of whether we were going to have access to even toilet paper, when people were hijacking toilet paper in the shops,
right?
You didn't know if you were going to be able to go out. My brain just shifted into this: what is the most sustainable way to deal with this natural occurrence every single month? And I thought, if there's any time that you're going to get comfortable and familiar with your body to that extent, this is the time. You're already at home, figure it out. And honestly, it's been the best experience for me. It definitely is a learning curve, but I just thought, how can I get this to other women, especially people living below a certain poverty line? Because it's reusable, it's hygienic, it's clean. It's just about access now to a little bit of water and a private space. And that's a big deal. So yeah, that's kind of my experience, and segued into this whole other thing.
Fantastic.
Oh, I love that. You know what I love about first time stories is that in just that breath, Folu has talked about stigma. She's talked about, it's such a wide array, and that's a lot of what we're going to discuss. She's talked about staining and all these realistic experiences that's already enriches the conversation. And I know FIFA was like, I'm ready to share mine. AZZIAD, can you briefly walk us through your own first time and just some of the lessons that Folu has drawn from hers and what you can draw from yours as well?
Yeah. My first time was not actually complicated, but it came with a lot of worries because I was in a boarding school. It was a mixed boarding school. And I had said we were in class 8, like the final year, we were in class 8. And most of the girls in the school had already begun their periods. And most of them had begun them in class. So it was sort of scary. I'm like, okay, when am I going to begin? Are they going to be in class? And the funny thing is that when their periods began in class, there was commotion in class. And it was funny because we were taught about this is it called science? I almost said biology. Biology is in high school. We're taught about this in science in class in class 6. So it was like normal. But the fact that this was happening in class 8 and people were still making a fuss about it was actually crazy. So good thing mine came when I was sleeping. And good thing about my periods is that I don't get cramps, I don't get anything. But I did not notice the behavior or the character that comes when I'm on my periods until way later. So so I was just sleeping and I woke up. I had stained a little bit, and I was like, oh, it's come. Nice, amazing. Because I was really waiting for it because a lot of people had already experienced theirs. So I was like, it's fine. I'm happy. I am rested well. We continued. And then good thing is that we had heard a lot of pad companies and a lot of people come to school, talk to us about it, how to handle it, how to use a pad, what to do, what to not do. So I was knowledgeable in that sector. So I never knew. Should I say right now what I never knew and the things I knew?
Yes.
Girl, share.
For a while, I did not know that you could actually choose a different pad size because I used to use a medium and sometimes it would leak. And I'm like, what is happening?
Wow.
Until way later, it's when I discovered, oh, wait, there's something called long, there's something called maxi. So
Right.
it's when I started switching up. Yeah. And also, I did not know how I would react during my periods because I'm not the moody kind. But during my period, I'm such a perfectionist. Like, I would want the cup to be where it is. If something is dirty, put it in the sink, not on the sink. There's hair there.
Real talk.
There is hair there. Why is it there? Please, the hair is not supposed. You understand? So yeah, it's just funny that the more you continue being a lady, the more you realize a lot of things about periods that you did not know from the stories you hear from other people, from the stories you get from your own experiences. So it's an amazing journey. It's also, yeah,
incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I'll just jump in. I won't make it too long. But mine, I think I was like 11, and I remember I didn't have any pre-conversations. I mean, I probably knew that, biologically, like you said, in class, maybe they taught us about it, but I mean, who's really listening to those things? You're just trying to pass your test, right? You're not like actually internalizing it. Like, oh, so this is, no, it's just taught to you like theory, like this thing and that thing, and then take your test. And so I think I was in school, and thankfully, I don't think it came onto my uniform, but I got home and I saw it on my underwear. And so I was confused. Like, I was like, well, what's happening? And so I went to meet my mom, and she was like, oh, you started, this, thing called a period, your menstruation. And I'm like, oh, that thing. Okay. And then she's like, oh, here are the things that you need for it. And that was probably the most conversation we had. And so when 2 years or so later, I started getting really, 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 really bad cramps, I didn't understand what was happening. And then my mom, and then she said, oh yeah, I had that when I was a kid. I used to roll around on the floor. I'm like, but why didn't you prepare? You could
have told me.
Yeah.
You could have told me. And that's not normal. You should not be rolling on the floor, right? Like a doctor should have helped you with it. But of course, I mean, my mom was in her 60s at that time. And so you can imagine, right? Like the time that she came from, if we're here talking about 50, million girls don't get access, imagine back then how many million weren't getting any kind of, information. So this is not even to fault her. This is just literally to talk about, to identify the big problem, which is the fact that it's not it's a taboo. Nobody wants to talk about it. Like when I started having my period, it's like, shh, don't tell anyone, nobody needs to know. And, oh, you're bleeding. Ew, that's disgusting. It's always this disgusting thing. And for me, it's like, this is literally my life. So it's like you're saying I'm disgusting. That's how it feels.
Yeah, exactly. And I know some of what we wanted to cover today, like I said, it's come out in a lot of these stories. We want to talk about how do we end stigma and taboo, what kind of policies do we need to put in place? And that's exactly the crux of this conversation today on this World Health Day. Don't get me started about periods. I feel like I've talked about periods nonstop since 2013, when, because of this story called Periods of Shame that showed girls in a village in Kenya using cowhide, goat hide, soil, chicken feathers in place of sanitary pads. I think that's why it stayed with me and inspired me to start a foundation that essentially deals with menstrual equity. Because imagine 2013, goat hide, chicken feathers, and the fact that it's 2022 and you still have people using unsanitary products. That is still so triggering and upsetting, even though, of course, many years have passed. Policies have come up, I know that, in Nigeria, we saw that there was at least some kind of move to want to improve access. Right. Same in Kenya. But the world over, the gaps exist, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Nepal. The world over, if you're menstruating, you're surviving by God's grace. Unless you have access to whatever resources, then unfortunately, you're either reduced to, you're too dirty to be in the same house with me. So there are women right now who are reduced to being in a hut somewhere because they're dirty. Just like what Fife has just said, like, you should be ashamed. That's the sad reality of 2022. And that's why first-time stories open up that kind of conversation to talk about, wait, but where are the gaps? When I did this book called My First Time, I had a woman who was formerly incarcerated. So she talked about prison and periods. There's a girl who was on the streets. She talked about being a street child with periods. So when you listen to people's stories, you actually open up this conversation around, wait, hang on. If we're thinking about girls in Nigeria and Kenya and all parts of the world not having access, what about girls living with disability? What about people who are visually impaired? What about, and at the end of the day, we're trying to say, how do we get to the place where there is access for every single person, no matter what they look like, no matter where they're from? And maybe we can jump into that, Fife, with Folo and AZZIAD. First, let's talk about stigma. We've all talked about how there was this little shame of, you're on your period, you shouldn't talk about. My mom told me, don't let boys touch you. That's all she said. She said, listen, first of all, I was 10 years old, so I didn't know what was. I thought I was dying because nobody told me about it. Yeah. All she did is a pad and don't let boys touch you. You know what I mean? So how do we take away the stigma and the shame? I know. I'm like,
listen.
You have to say don't let boys touch you. Really?
I'm sorry. That's what's so funny.
Listen, you say that, but that's not even the first time that's not even the first time I've heard that statement at this point, right? Because I think every time the conversation has been had around periods, it's being had only with girls, which I think is very problematic. That's part of what's leading to the stigma. This conversation needs to be had with both boys and girls.
Absolutely.
Because also in that first time, you know, I'm lucky enough to have brothers in my life, and my poor brothers, everything I experience, I'm like, yo, do boys have periods? Do you got, what's your version? What's, you know, and they were freaked out. They were like, I don't understand. I said, I don't understand. We're all learning together, you know? So I feel like because of having me in their lives, there's certain things that they're a lot more comfortable with having discussions about. They don't shy away from. And, you know, I guess that's a virtue of how I was raised, which is useful in some ways. But I think that not in schools, in homes, you must have that conversation with your boys and your girls. It must be something that is so normal that people expect it to happen. In public bathrooms, especially where you have male and female bathrooms, it's something that must be, first of all, the hygiene in these bathrooms, it absolutely needs to improve. Access to clean water, just educating policymakers who are setting up these bathrooms to say, okay, simple things like just having little waste bins in each of the bathroom stalls. That has caused major fights for me in my life as an adult woman. Yes, I'm dragging men up and down. That's hello. Why am I having to trek outside from the bathroom to a general public place to draw? Because you haven't thought about it. They don't feel like it's their concern, but it is their concern. You know what I mean? So I feel that the starting point for all of this is having those conversations. And if you have men in your lives, don't hide that stuff. Ask them when they're going to the store, please help me buy tampons, size XYZ. Why are you grossed out by it, sir? Why is that a problem? No, it's a biological process. Let's normalize it. Let it be a normal thing. Don't hide it. Don't, you know, because even when you're bleeding, sometimes you go to a pharmacy and it's almost second nature for a lot of women to like, oh, there's a man around. Let me hide my period products. They mustn't see it. It happens. It happens. It's normal. And we've got to get comfortable with dragging our men folk along with us. That this is what happens. You know, as I'm learning, you're learning. It's not something that a wisdom that is put in me, you know, from heaven as I arrive on earth. It's not. I'm having to learn these things. Therefore, we should all be learning these things together. Absolutely. You know, education is that's how I see it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I just want to I can't stress that enough, like that it's literally us going through it together, you know, because for me, the trauma, and I use the word trauma because that's what it's been. I'm sorry, my period has literally been a traumatic experience in my existence, just based on everything that I've, you know what I'm saying, had to figure out on my own. And I couldn't ask my brothers, right? Like I grew up with 4 brothers, but they don't know what to tell me. They're just like, oh, well, she's going through that thing again, you know, and we're just going to leave her to go through it. But the fact is, like, you know, they never, it's just, they cannot comprehend what's the issue. So for instance, I've had to multiple times take off of work because it debilitates me, literally, right? So I've been dealing with a condition called endometriosis, right, for forever. First, it started with polycystic. I had cysts, you know, when I was like a teenager. That's when the cramping started. My mom had didn't even know that was what it was because she'd been through it before when she was a kid. So she was just like, yeah, you know, I'll just roll all over the floor and then eventually I'd be okay. But nobody told her to get checked for that, you know what I mean, for that reason. But because this was, you know, obviously 60 years later, I had the opportunity to do that. And they're like, oh, you have cysts, just take, you know, painkillers and you'll be fine. Like I was going to the ER because that's how the pain was, because this is when I was in the US. And then by the time I was in my late teens and early 20s, they then checked again. And it turned out that I now had endometriosis and had to do a surgery. And I was just devastated because I'm like, whoa, how did we get here? Like, how did we get here? No, you know, and I strongly believe if I had information, you know, I have friends that had to take out their fibroid, but they didn't even at 40 because they didn't even know it was there. Nobody ever checked. You know, they were supposed to be doing, you know, pap smears every, you know what I mean, to even check for these things that are also, you know, obviously related to our menstruation. And so at the end of the day, she's like, dang, I wish. And she's grew up even in a developed country. Imagine, you know, here. right? And here she is like, damn, I wish somebody told me about this, then I would have managed it. I would have, you know what I'm saying, figured out what to do to take care of it. I mean, fine, you know, there are ways to combat these things, but like you said, education is key. The first step is knowledge, having that information, and then you know what to do about it. So for me, I mean, I just really feel like it's a